I wanted to dedicate this class to our grandson who, like so many grandsons and sons, will be enlisting tomorrow. It's Ilana and Michael's sixth child, and he is enlisting and will be part of a unit called Kfir, which is a very, very physical, very tough unit. They handle the defense in Shomron and Yehuda, in Yehuda and Shomron, quote unquote, the West Bank. They do a lot of the work in Jenin. He needs time for what's called Hachshara, which is preparation, although we've been told that the Hachshara, because of the need for more manpower, is being accelerated. And our prayer that he and all of our Chayalim and Chayalot, they all be safe. And I also wanted, with your permission, to dedicate this to my dear, dear friend and mentor, to Tova Bulal. I go back with Tova. Tibadli L'chaim Arukim and her late husband, Norman, many, many decades. Tova, we once worked together for Amcha, where I try to double and triple Tova's salary, but double and triple of zero is still zero. So that's what Tova did. She would be there day and night, wouldn't accept a penny. And I had this dream, urged on by several colleagues, Rabbi Aaron Frank, to do a Haggadah, and it was made possible by Tova. I thought it would be out by this Pesach. It's actually pretty much finished. It looks like this. And you can see there's some markings on it because it needs final corrections, but we are getting 50 copies of what they call a preview edition. So I'll be able to send it to family. And if there's anybody who wants it, if I have extra, I'll be happy to share it with you. But it is a dream come true that God has given me the years and the time and the health to do this Haggadah, which I hope will make a small contribution to the many Haggadot on the scene. And in the Haggadah, in the acknowledgments, I do acknowledge Rabbi Kahn, who was the first rabbi to do an English commentary on the Haggadah. And that birthed a plethora of Haggadot with English commentary that have appeared. So to you, Tova, my thank you. And I'm just so grateful to you, Tova, for doing this and partnering with me. I write, my dear gratitude, blessings and love to my dear friend and mentor, Tova Bulal, for the indispensable role she played in the creation of this work. Tova is the epitome of Yehi Or, let there be light, which is the name of the Haggadah, the light of God, the light of Torah, the light of Israel and Sion, the light of the world. To you, dear Tova, and your beloved Norman of blessed memory, our blessings for continued teaching of the message of light, the light of love reaching higher and higher, or Ahava. So what we'll do now is I'll speak for about 25 minutes with Shuli's help. And our goal here is for me to share with humility, because I'm one person who has some thoughts, but I know that there are so many other reflections that others can make, and that's why I'm going to try to make time for that. But how I'll be attempting to make this Seder, bearing in mind the difficult days that we're experiencing, Israelite war, to make it a bit more meaningful. And my purpose here is not to exhaust the possibilities of doing just that for you, But I hope this serves as an inspiration for everyone with their own creativity to do the same, to think about the different parts of the Seder and how we can make it meaningful. This year, I'll be beginning the Seder quoting a sentence from the Psalms, which reads, Be'orcha nir'eh or. Some say this every morning as we are preparing to pray. Be'orcha nir'eh or means, in your light, in the light of God, let there be light. Those words, Yehi Or, are the first words of God in the Torah. And this year, when the war broke out on October 7th in Israel on Simchat Torah, in Israel we were concluding the 5 books, and we were starting from Bereshit, reading the first chapter. And in that first chapter, there is a description of the world being in darkness, the choshech al pnei tehom. And then God speaks for the first time, Vayome Elokim, and God proclaims, let there be light. And the light, as is said in Hasidic circles, has the power to push away the darkness. Ktsat meha or doche harbe min hachoshech. And as much as we faced an existential danger at that moment, the greatest attack against the Jewish people, a pogrom since the Shoah, still yet you could feel the flickers of Yehi Or. And so as we gather around the Seder table, we'll be reciting that verse, those words from the Tehillim, Be'orcha nir'eh or, in your light there will be light. The Haggadah begins with an introductory section which can be called the children's Haggadah. The Talmud actually talks about this and says that in order to keep children awake and interested, we do things at the Haggadah which is children friendly. So note in the Haggadah, what we normally do before the festive meal, we do twice at the Seder. That's not a coincidence. Let's think about that. Normally, we drink 1 cup of wine before the meal, before Shabbat or the Chag. At the Seder, we're going to be drinking 2 cups of wine. Normally, we wash our hands once before we eat. At the Seder, we're going to be washing our hands twice. Normally, we break challah once before the Seder, once before the festive meal or Shabbat. At the Seder, we break the matzah not once, but twice. And the first time we argue in the Haggadah Yehi Or, it's a bit more simple to make it especially welcoming to children, to pique their curiosity so that they can ask questions, all reaching the crescendo when a child calls out, Manishtana. Manishtana. Why is this night different? In the end, we're all children. I recall when my father was dying, I was already 70 years old, and he looked into my eyes and he said, just remember, Avrami, you'll always be my little boy. You're still my little child, my son. And in the end, no matter our age, we're all children. And we ask our parents the question, why? Can it be suggested that maybe this Pesach, the children are asking not only our father, our mother, whether they're here or not, but we're asking God, who is our father, who is our mother. God is described as the Av Harachaman. God is the father, Av Harachaman, from the word Rechem, which means womb. It's the infinite and unconditional love of a mother from the womb. And we're asking, why, God? Why? Why did we deserve what occurred on October 7th? Where were you, O God? And asking such questions of God, as my son Dove has pointed out in his work, Pious Irreverence, is not a sign of disrespect. It's a sign of love. We know we're in love when I'm open enough with you to express what I'm feeling, my deepest feelings. And so this Pesach, all of us as children should be asking, Manishtana, why is this night? Why has this occurred? I'm reminded of that moment when, all the way back more than 20 years ago, after the Sparrow Pizza store was bombed, there was a Dutch family that had 5 losses. And there was a mission from the Bayit in Israel, and we went to the funeral. You could see 2 large coffins, mother and father, and then a large coffin, a long coffin of a teenage child, and then 2 infant coffins of 2 little children. And Rabbi Yisrael Lau stood up and he said, looking towards God, he said, God, ani lo shoel ma, ani lo shoel lama, ani lo shoel madua. Avalani ken shoel ad matai. I don't ask why, but I do ask until when. And after the Manishtana, we arrive at the very, very well-known 4 sons, Arba Banim, which I translate 4 children, because this is obviously not only about sons, it's about daughters. And at this celebration, when we gather at this Seder, we should remind ourselves that we are surrounded around the Seder table by people of all backgrounds. Some are wise, some are rebellious, some are simple, some can't ask a question. As a matter of fact, these 4 individual children may all coalesce into each of us. We all have an aspects of what we know, of what we don't know, what we agree with, what we assent to, how we rebel. There's a simple side to us, which could be sophisticated. There's a side to us who doesn't know how to ask the question. But the key is we're sitting around the table and we are in dialogue. And as we dialogue, we are dialoguing respectfully. As Menachem Begin would say, we disagree agreeably, listening to the other, trying to understand that we have much to learn from the other. My top politics has been very right-wing. I'm looking at people on this Zoom whom I've grown up with, whose positions have very much influenced me. I'm not the raving maniac I used to be, in no small measure because of many people who are on this Zoom. You know who you are. And that's the key. The key is listening to the other, recognizing I have no monopoly on passionately loving the land of Israel. I have no monopoly on having all the knowledge relative to the land of Israel. There are others who are just as erudite, who have just as much to contribute and know as much and more than I know. And at our Seder, I'll be reading what we include in the Haggadah, and I'll just touch a little bit upon it. Shuli will show it. It's a unity poem, which we wrote a bit ago. And in this unity poem, I write, Apintalayid, Apintalayid, which means just the spark of, of the Jew. Now, the truth of the matter is, Apintala means a spark, but I've taken this to mean a small yid. Let me see if I can find this in the Haggadah. So here's what I write. The phrase Pintala Yid is normally understood to refer to the spark in every Jew. No matter how distant, every Yid deep down has a Jewish inner soul with the potential to grow. But in this poem, we take a different approach, understanding Pintala as a small, lonely Jew. And yet, two Jews aside each other, no matter how vulnerable, can find relief. I first heard this thought many decades ago during the first, you can see it on the right-hand side, International Conference for Soviet Jewry held in Brussels. At its close, a tall young man was given the floor, sharing that he came from Buenos Aires, where as a Jew, he felt particularly isolated and alone. Like a Pintala Yid, he looked out at the thousands in attendance. Through tears he shared, and now standing with you in unity, in common cause, I feel like a Yud, the letter Yud near another Yud, together spelling the name of God. And so the poem reads, and we'll be sending it out. Apintala Yid, Yehudi Boded, Yehudi Chevriri. Apintala Yid, a lonely Jew, a vulnerable Jew. Apintala Yud, a lonely mark, a tiny Hebrew letter. A Yud aside another, a Jew beside an other, evokes the name of God. In unity, God sees it is good. Achdut la'olam einena achidut. Unity is never uniformity. Uniformity, if we could point to the place, Shuli, it's the fourth paragraph, is uniform, crushing other views. Unity is united, despite differences. Dear God, help us to know that Am Yisrael is more than the nation of Israel. We are family, and the test of family is not how we love when we agree, but how we love when we disagree. And it ends with these words, Azor lanu lahachriz ki Yehudi kitzoni ani, lo liyamin o lismol ela kitzoni bavat achai haYehudim. Help us declare I am a kitzoni, an extremist Jew, not on the right, not on the left, but an extremist in loving other Jews. Ahavat Yisrael. That's the reading for the four children for the Dalit Banim. And this year, when I read about the child who can't ask a question, I'll be thinking of a soldier I met a few months ago, Nathaniel Felber. I first met him when he was in the intensive care unit. I met his parents, a Chayal who was seriously injured in a terrorist attack. And now 4 or 5 years later, I was seeing him for the first time. What I didn't know as he entered into our apartment was that he could not walk. He was in a wheelchair and he could not speak. And we spent an hour communicating with each other. That's what I'll be thinking about when it comes to the She'eno Yodea Lish'ol. Yes, Netanel cannot speak, and yet he does speak. He does think. In fact, his mind is intact, and he slowly types what he's feeling on a computer. And when reading the She'eno Yodea Lish'ol, I'll be offering the prayer for all the Chayalim, for all the soldiers who have been stricken, that they have a Hachlama Mehira, that they have a full healing. I'm thinking of our own Dr. Josh Altman, who has been in Israel for the past few years. He and his wife from the Bayit are making a go at going on Aliyah. And he spent day in and day out, he's an accomplished psychologist, in trying to be there for others. And I was with him in the Beersheba hospital in Soroka when we met a soldier who was so withdrawn, not speaking. His name was David. He came from the north of the Shomron. And I turned to Josh. I said, Josh, you're the psychologist. I whispered, maybe you can help. And he looked at the soldier and he said, just take a small step today, a tiny step. And tomorrow, take another small step. And the next day, if you can, only if you can, another small step. And after a week, you'll look back and you'll see the small steps add up. And then something magical occurred. As I tell it to you, I have the shivers. Suddenly, the soldier's eyes opened. A smile crossed his face. And he looked at Dr. Josh Altman and he said clearly, Ani ohev otcha, I love you. And they embraced. Yes, at the Seder, it is a time to think about all the soldiers who are injured, some so seriously. The story of the soldiers whom we met in Sheba, he and she, ready to be married, were victims of 10-7, and both of them lost a leg, and they soon after, and they married. The child who can't ask. And I'm very thankful to my dear friend Eitan Ashman, young, strapping, strong man who suffered a serious stroke, and Haggadah has now been written by him. Could you imagine, even as he's suffering from aphasia? And it was he who planted this idea of the She'eno Yodea Lish'ol. And then we come to the listing of the Makot, and we put our pinky into the wine, red wine, symbolic of blood, and we spill small drops. Now, normally this is understood to remind us of the pain of having to spill human blood, even the blood of the enemy, in order to attain victory. It's the Golden Meir comment. Maybe one day I'll be able to excuse the Egyptians for killing our sons, but I'll never be able to excuse them for forcing us to kill them in our defense. It's the story our eldest grandson, Gilad, told me going back 10 years. He was already in the army in Sayeret Degos. All he said to me was, Sabi, what a horrible war. In Gaza, we went into an Arab home and we saw a little Arab girl, 3 years old, strapped in explosives. That's all he said, and we're instructed not to ask any questions. And he never told me what happened. Even if you come out of that war physically intact, there is a PTSD. Forcing to kill others is painful. But here I say something that I know some will push back on me. This year, I will feel no compassion. I will not be spilling any blood in sadness for the rapists and the decapitators and the pedophiles and those who abused even cadavers who were killed by the IDF. I'll feel no compassion. For me, the spilling of the blood this year as it relates to the enemy will be the cry, the tragedy that the enemy has sunk to such a low level that the enemy has lost their blood. Blood is life. They have lost their right to live. They have lost their humanity. They have lost their tzelem Elokim, their image of God. That's the pasuk in Perek Tet, Shofech dam hadam, badam damo yishafech. Technically, there's capital punishment in the Torah, although the Talmud tells us it was seldom, if ever, carried out. But in the Torah, why is there capital punishment? Ki b'tzelem Elokim asat adam. Because the murderer was created b'tzelem Elokim, but in murdering the other, he's become bereft of b'tzelem Elokim, no image of God. And then the Dayenu, enough. How I remember the rallies when we gathered in front of the Soviet mission. I remember Rabbi Norman Lamb crying out, if the Soviets only did the doctor's plot, Dayenu, if the Soviets only incarcerated Natan Sharansky and nothing else, Dayenu, enough of all of the negativity. But this year, as we read Dayenu, let's remember that the Dayenu is not a negative presentation. The Dayenu is, we say to God, God, if you only did this little thing for me, it would have been enough. Dayenu is not the song when we focus on the negatives, but on the positives. The positives, it's a moment to thank God for all the little things that we often take for granted, that we should never take for granted, even now during this time of war. And here's a time to reflect on the myriads who stepped up and to thank them. All were participating, all were contributing. And so I'll be reciting then the prayer that we wrote a couple of years ago during COVID. I say it every morning, Yididi, Ahuvi, Mahmad, Nafshi. My beloved, precious God, Ana Azor li lehodot lecha. Oh God, help me acknowledge you. Al kol habrachot she'enaktali, for all the blessings which you've bestowed upon me. V'lo latetet libi habrachot shechaserot li. And oh God, please help me that my heart should not be heavy concerning all the blessings I do not have. Ve'ana azor li lekabel ba'ava, et hayom she'omed b'fanai, yom kadosh v'raverach. And God, help me receive this day as a day of quality, as a day of meaning, as a day of ahava she'en lo erech, of unlimited, infinite possibilities. Dayenu, oh God, thank you. And it's a time not only to say thank you to God, but to say thank you, as I mentioned, to those who, with little munitions on 10-7, ran into the fray to protect their brothers and sisters. Thank you to the doctors, to the healers. Thank you to those who brought washing machines to the borders so that they can wash soldiers' clothes. Thank you to those who bought shoes and brought them to the border. Our grandson told us that when he was in Gaza, he didn't take off his boots for weeks. When he finally came out, did he have to wear the same boots? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for those who set up dining rooms right on the border. 3 brothers serving 5,000 soldiers every day. Thank you. And right after the Dayenu, we say, B'chol dor dor, chayav adam lerot et atzmo kilu hu nigal. I use the language of Maimonides, chayav adam laharot et atzmo. At the Seder, we reenact as if we are slaves. And it's that point when we say, B'chol dor vador, in every generation, that I think it's important that we point to an empty chair, which should be symbolizing the hostages. Every Seder should have that empty chair. That chair will be Noah's chair, the woman who, when taken, is on video all over the world, whose mother, Leora, we became close to, has cancer, and she appealed to the world, I know I'm dying. Help me see my son before I leave this earth. Let that chair be Hirsch's chair. Hirsch Poland, who was last seen, his arm blown off as he was being taken away and kidnapped, and offer thank you to Rachel and to John, his parents, for so eloquently stepping into the breach and speaking out on his behalf. To Idan Alexander, a Chayal Boded, a lone soldier from America. He was not obligated to serve. Israeli citizens are obligated to serve. He was an American, and he joined Garin Sabar, and I had the great honor to serve as the spiritual leader of Garin Sabar, and he was in some of our seminars where I was honored to speak, and frankly, I'm not sure I'm going to continue, because the responsibility of inspiring people to go into the army at my age is, I'm finding overwhelming, especially bearing in mind what happened to Eden. And there were other Garinate Sabah Chayalim. Rose, the woman who was a Garin Sabar from Israel, he volunteered. He volunteered, put his life on the line, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. As we draw closer to the meal, there is this moment of korech. Korech is that moment when we create what some say is the first sandwich ever created in the world. We take the bitter herbs, and it is the tuna fish, if you will, between the two pieces of bread. Of course, it's not bread, it's flat bread, it's non-fermented bread, it's matzah. And we take the bitter herbs, symbolic of agonizing pain, and we surround it with matzah, symbol of freedom, and consume that sandwich. Such is life. Two opposites, slavery and freedom, death and life, mourning and celebration, sometimes mesh. You know who said this brilliantly? Yehuda Amichai. Let's take a look at his poem when he writes beautifully. He says, there's love in war, and there's war in love. Let's see that poem. A man doesn't have time in his life to have time for everything. He doesn't have seasons enough to have a season for every purpose. Ecclesiastes was wrong about that. A man needs to love and hate at the same moment, to laugh and cry with the same eyes, with the same hands to throw stones and gather them in. I love this line, to make love in war and war in love, and to hate and forgive and remember and forget, to arrange and confuse, to eat and digest. What history takes years and years to do, a man doesn't have time. As he loses, he seeks. As he finds, he forgets. As he forgets, he loves. And as he loves, he begins to forget. Will I ever forget Erez Laufer's bar mitzvah in Yerushalayim? Should he go through with it? He walked into his hall where there was celebration, singing and dancing, and you see a map of all of the kibbutzim who were attacked. And giving him a blessing was an artist from one of those kibbutzim who had been invited by Chani and Steve. And here he had his wares, wondering if people would be interested in buying them at a time of great difficulty for the artist. What a moment. The moment when too many widows were at burials and they were carrying their husband's seed, their husband's child to be born later on. Korech, such is the way of life. And we eat, and then we say the grace after meals. And it is preceded by the Shir Hamalot. And in the Shir Hamalot, in that psalm, there is this phrase I never understood until this war. It reads, Haloch yelech uvacho. We will walk as we cry. Always wondered, walk while you cry? Why not just cry? Why is it walking while crying? Now, on the foundational level, it really is lifted from the story of Elijah, who, when he goes heavenward, Elisha, his student, and those with Elisha, the text tells us they were crying while walking. But we see it firsthand these days. At the funerals, hundreds, even thousands gather together, and there's a buzz, people whispering to each other. And suddenly on Har Herzl or in Gush Etzion or wherever, there's an absolute quiet. And you can hear a voice. It's a rabbi's voice on a portable mic. And his words are bouncing off the Jerusalem hills. And he says, Yoshe B'Seite Elyon B'Tzel Shaka Yitzlonan Orech Yamim Asbiyehu Varehu Bishuati, the psalm of a funeral. And he comes forward, Yoshe B'Seiter Elyon, God who dwells hidden, please be with us. And after he finishes the psalm, with great emotion, I tell you, the tekez is right behind him, 8 soldiers carrying a coffin. And they're somber, showing utmost respect, most of the time close friends, friend carrying a friend who had fallen in battle, even though I don't like the term nafal, because I believe soldiers who die for Israel are rising up, are sanctifying God's name. May they all find life and not have to pay that price. And so the coffin is carried, and right behind the coffin, right behind these soldiers who are quite stoic, is the family, spouse, husband or wife, parents, children, family, broader family, and they're sobbing. They're sobbing while they're walking, and they're walking while they're crying. Haloch yelech uvacho, walking and crying, crying and walking. And after the Birkat HaMazon, we recite the Hallel. We recite the Hallel because it deals with national redemption, which segues into universal redemption. The Hallel, it's called the Hallel HaMitzri, segues into the Hallel HaGadol. From talking about Yivarech Bet Yisrael, that God will bless the house of Israel, we will ultimately say, Hodu Lashem Ki Tov, praise the Lord for he is good, Ki Liolam Chasta. And that Olam is not just a time word, a time now that his kindness is eternal, but Lolam is spatial. Ki Liolam Chasto, God's kindness is for the whole world. I believe Judaism is one of the most universal religions that exist. For us, you don't have to be Jewish to be an ethical Chasidei Umota Olam, higher perhaps even than a Jew, depending upon how one leads her or his life. As I've said over and over, a strong sense of national consciousness does not contradict our universal responsibilities, but it is a segue to those universal responsibilities. Hallel. And that's why we conclude with L'Shana Haba'a B'Yerushalayim. Next year, this year in Jerusalem, for 19 years under Jordanian rule, Jews were not permitted into the city. Synagogues were destroyed, and it's walls, its cement walls were turned into latrines. You could walk on Jerusalem sidewalks and you could see monuments from cemeteries became sidewalks. It's only post 1967 that it's open. And this sense of universal responsibility we saw most recently. I'm thinking of those Iranian missiles. And they were missiles, you could see the video, ready to hit the Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount, ready to hit Al-Aqsa, the third holiest of places in Islam, ready to hit. And who took them out? Who protected that mosque? Those missiles were intercepted by the Israeli air defense system. The Americans did work outside of Israel, but in Israel, it was Israel's air defense system. It's quite something. The enemy cared little for its holy places, while Israel protected that site, Yerushalayim. And the Seder, its last song is the Chad Gadya. Chad Gadya. And it's a song about one kid. It's a playful song, which most people understand as speaking about what has occurred throughout history, that the kid is struck by or bitten by the cat, and the dog bites the cat, and on and on and on. But in the end, goodness will prevail. Whatever we've gone through as Jews, that's the way it's understood. At the end of the Seder, we're tired. So there's something a bit more comical, but that has a very, very deep message. In this Haggadah, I try to argue that Chad Gadya could have another meaning. Chad is Echad. Gadya is not only a kid. Gadya is from the word lahagid. And here, why not go around the table and ask if anyone would like to contribute one story, Chad Gadya, one story of how during this war they made a difference. How during this war they made a difference. And I'll be thinking about, especially when we read about the ox. Do you remember the ox who drinks the water? And ultimately the ox is going to be slaughtered, but the ox has a place. You know who I'll be thinking about? I'll be thinking about that incident when the IDF soldiers mistakenly killed 3 hostages thinking that they are terrorists. And as a Daf Yomi person on that day, we were studying this Mishnah. The Mishnah says, if an ox intended to murder a Kanani, which in Talmudic language is a terrorist par excellence. Obviously, par excellence is not the phrase that should be used. A horrific Kanani intends to kill the Kanani, but instead kills a Jew, then the owner of the ox is exempt. But he has to pay atonement money. Now, obviously, we're not talking about oxen, but on every daf I try to offer a spiritual take from that daf. And it was on that day that something similar happened, although on a much, much more important level. We thought it was a terrorist, a Kanani, and as it turned out, it was a Jew. And at that point, Iris, the mother of one of the 3, she made what arguably could have been the most holy statement made during all of these months of war. Let's take a look at what she said. I believe that Shuli has found it. These are her words. She says, at the first opportunity, you are invited. She's inviting the soldiers to come to us, whoever wants to. And we want to see you with our own eyes and hug you and tell you that what you did However hard it is to say this, and said, it was apparently the right thing and at that moment. And nobody's going to judge you or be angry. Not me, and not my husband Raviv, not my daughter Noya, and not Yotam, may his memory be blessed, and not Tuval, Yotam's brother. We love you very much, and that is all. And along with thousands, I was so moved that we went to the Shiva, small moshav outside of Yerushalayim. And you could see the father is standing in front of his home. Wait your moment to say a few words in a few seconds. But I wanted to see the mother, Iris. And I walked up the road and looked down the hill, and I saw her. She was sitting in a circle, she and 4 soldiers around her. And it was clear she wanted this time for herself. And so with others, we waited. And she spoke and spoke for an hour. And finally, she made her way up this little knoll, this little hill, said a few words to her. And then with others, we walked down and we sat with the soldiers, first silently, and then we began to speak. And they began to speak. And there they were, M16s over their shoulders, and they were in tears. And I thought about that Talmudic statement, when that mistake occurs, exempt, patur, but one pays atonement money forever. That's what Shmuel says. That was the moment. That was the moment I'll never forget. One final step. At our Seder this year, like every year, we're going to conclude by standing up and singing Hatikva. With all we've experienced, this is not the time for pessimism. This is the time of hopefulness. And so we'll sing Hatikva, the anthem of hope. Is there any other nation on the face of the earth that calls its national anthem a song of hope? Maybe. I'm not aware of it. Only Israel. Let's rise for Hatikva. But friends, hope is a feeling. And feelings are not right nor wrong, they just are. How can one be hopeful? What is the pathway to being hopeful? The pathway, I believe, is whatever you feel, whatever we feel, let's talk hope. Let's do hope. Let's act hopefully. And from that behavior, the action will hopefully come. The action will hopefully come, as the Chinuch says, Lefi hapulot nimshachim halavavot. From the action, the feelings will emerge. Doesn't start with hope and then doing. Do hopeful. And from that, the feeling will come. And then we'll be able to turn Ezekiel's prophecy over the valley of the dry bones. And he looks over, one of my father's favorite prophecies, he looks over the dry bones and he says, Avda tikvatenu, our hope is lost. Avda tikvatenu, just dry bones here. Hatichyena atzamot ha'eleh, can dry bones live? And in the tikva, hatikva, I believe it was purposeful. What is the text in that tikva? Od lo avda tikvatenu. Yeah? To Ezekiel, who said our hope is lost, our response is, our hope is not lost. Od lo avda tikvatenu. Yes, our Seder this year takes place in a dark time. It's a dark time, but a remarkable time. Today, we are not studying history, but we're living history. Each of us is enlisted in, in Israel's army. Not all of us in green fatigues, but giving. However we give, on whatever level we give, it's significant. Giving to our people, to our homeland, all of us declaring, Yehi or let there be light.